So there's this guy, right? He's a Fire Emblem lord about late teens, very determined with a strong sense of duty. He'll charge into battle as soon as he gets word of conflict. He's also close with a girl who's not too fond of his knack of just charging into things and would rather have peace. Now, which am I talking about? Alm or Ephraim? Welcome to Mirror Emblem Light and Shadow. In this series, we'll be taking two separate characters from two separate games and showing you how they're not as different as they might seem. In this episode, we have Alm from Gaiden/Echoes and Ephraim from Sacred Stones. I thought this would be a good idea for the first episode for a number of reasons. The most prevalent one was due to the fact that a lot of people were confused when I presented that Alm and Ephraim were meant to be mirrors of each other in my Gaiden video. To show you what I mean, we're going to compare and contrast some traits these two share, hypothesize what would happen if they switch places, and answer the most important question in the history of questions. Who would win in a fight?
Wonderful!
So let's jump right into it. Welcome to Mirror Emblem, Alm vs. Ephraim. This was mentioned briefly in my video on Fire Emblem Gaiden, but Ephraim's character in Sacred Stones was made specifically as a tribute to Alm. In fact, the entire Sacred Stones game was made as a tribute to Gaiden. Things like its world map, non-human enemies, and dual lords would be borrowed. However, times had changed since the release of Gaiden, and character dynamics needed to change with it. Ephraim could not be a carbon copy of Alm. But wait, you might say. How could Ephraim be an Alm copy if Alm had no real character in Gaiden? And that's where I'd say you're wrong, dear viewer. There's a common misconception among the fanbase that Gaiden Alm had little to no character in his game, and the only semblance of life came from his "Don't worry Celica" line.
Trust these bastards.
This isn't entirely true. Gaiden Alm, surprisingly, goes through a bit of a character journey. Our first look at Alm in Gaiden reveals his somewhat impulsive sense of duty. At the beginning of Gaiden, Alm is very quick to join the Deliverance when asked by Lucas. Could this be because of the textual limitations of the Famicom? Could be, but it definitely creates a much more interesting character, and it's a trait that was carried into Shadows of Valentia. Alm has sat in Ram Village for far too long, and he feels that he needs to make a difference for himself. In Shadows of Valentia, Alm says, "I doubt I could have talked Mycen into letting me join the army. Not that it would have changed things either way, I have to go. Not just to prove him as a teacher, but to prove myself to me." However, Alm's impulsiveness in Gaiden and Shadows of Valentia are shown a little bit differently. Alm in Shadows of Valentia joined the Deliverance after being told that Mycen could not. In Gaiden, Alm joins the Deliverance after being specifically told no by Mycen. Both iterations of Alm sense that they have something important to do, but Gaiden Alm is definitely a bit more edgy and rebellious. This is where Ephraim comes in. Ephraim is probably the human embodiment of "you can't tell me what to do." He's always jumping headfirst into things because he feels like he has to. If nobody else is gonna raid this castle, who better than only me and my two friends? That's probably the most famous example of Ephraim's instinctive behavior, but his support with Kyle is another great indicator of this. For a bit of context, prior to this upcoming quote, Kyle has approached Ephraim about not being so reckless in battle. Ephraim tries his best, but he finds that he cannot. Kyle says, "No, Prince, I know I've told you this before, but you have to remember, you're the future of Renee." To this, Ephraim replies, "And if we fail because I do not join the battle, we have no future." Both Alm and Ephraim feel as if they have a duty to perform and that they must do it for something that they care about. Alm for himself and his grandfather, and Ephraim for the future of his country. And even then, Alm begins to discover that his country needs him, so their goals do become aligned in the end. To Ephraim, the world has always been a place filled with fighting and sorrow, and that's a thing that he's learned to accept and embrace.
Give me more! More!
In his support with Erica, he mentions that peace is his ultimate goal, but he thinks that it can't truly exist without fighting for it. He says, "I pray for peace to return to our fair Renee. I know that war only brings sorrow, and yet, somewhere in my heart, there is a lust for battle that cannot be stilled. It screams within me when I clutch this spear." Well, of course, Erica thinks that her brother's gone insane, and he reassures her that his love for the fight is firmly based on helping the country. The biggest theme of Ephraim's support with his sister is the contrast of fighting versus peace, and this suspiciously sounds like the relationship between two other characters in the franchise. Yeah, Alm and Celica. This conversation of war and peace is mainly brought up during their reunion at Zofia Castle, but their talk definitely gets more heated than their Sacred Stones counterparts. Alm's most important quote from this scene is as follows, You can't just tell the people of Zofia to go live under the barbarous rule of Rigel. Seeing as how Rigel aided Dessay in ravaging the lands of Zofia, we've got no choice but to fight. And then there's also the main artwork of Shadows of Valentia to consider when thinking of this theme. Celica is holding her head down in prayer, while Alm is holding his head up and carrying a sword. It's subtle, but it clearly shows that Alm is the war to Celica's peace, just as how Ephraim is the war to Erica's peace. Neither Alm nor Ephraim really wanted to end up as king of their country, but it is something that they both must accept in the end. In Alm's case, this comes from the fact that he was fully unaware that he was royal blood. In Ephraim's case, he just doesn't want to do anything except become a mercenary. One thing's for sure, they both definitely don't want to become regal boys. By the end, though, both of them come into their regal roles because they put their country first. Both of them are remembered centuries after their death for not only rebuilding the kingdom that they hail from, but also for rebuilding the continent itself. Ephraim helps restore Magville, and Alm establishes Valentia. So, these boys are pretty similar. But they can't be exact mirrors of each other, so where do they differ? Well, Alm is definitely more gentle and loving than Ephraim is, especially since the latter basically admits that they have trouble feeling close to anyone. Ephraim is definitely a bit more crazy than Alm, as I'm not sure that Alm would have stormed a castle with only 2 men on hand. Alm probably would have done it with at least 3. Now here's a fun situation to think about. What if Ephraim was the new leader of the Deliverance? We're putting Ephraim into Shadows of Valentia, so as a royal, he probably would not have drawn so much controversy from people like Fernand, who probably would have stayed with the Deliverance.
I am not one to toy with.
This could have been very good for character development, as we would have gotten more scenes of Fernand interacting with the Deliverance, and more scenes of him with his best friend Clive.
What?
Speaking of Fernand's best friend, let's discuss Clive and Matilda. If you let Matilda get killed while she is captured, Clive kind of goes off on Alm. If Alm was Ephraim, however, this scene probably would have gotten a lot more heated. Ephraim knows what loss feels like, but he may not have been so sympathetic towards the death of Matilda. Sure, he would apologize, but unlike Alm, who stayed quiet and let Clive speak, Ephraim would probably have insisted that these are the sad things that happen in war, and one must move on. Let's put Alm in Ephraim's most famous scene, the storm of Renville Castle. Faced with the same options that Ephraim had, Alm would have most likely chosen the 3-man invasion. He would be more hesitant to try it, but he would still propose it, of course. However, as a non-royal, or what seemed to be a non-royal, Kyle, Ford, and Orson probably would have not gone along with the plan. In fact, in the normal version of this scene, the only reason any opposing opinions are shot down is due to the fact that Ephraim is a prince, and what he says goes. Ford, Kyle, and Orson probably would have talked some sense into Alm, regrouped, and gone to the nearby village instead of invading the castle. And now, we answer the age-old question. Which one of these manly, strong anime men would win in a battle to the death? Well, we've done the research, the math, and everything we need to determine this specific question, and we've come up with one final result. The winner of this battle is... Ephraim.
No one can stop me!
In addition to having a weapon triangle advantage, Ephraim was probably trained by many royal knights instead of just one. But rest assured, Alm would not go down without a fight. Comparing the base stats of the two, Alm immediately has Ephraim beat in multiple categories. However, Ephraim's growths are much better than Alm's, especially since he's cut that 80% HP growth. Coupled with Siegmund's +5 to Ephraim's strength, it's hard to say that this guy will ever be taken down. And Ephraim's kind of crazy for fighting. He doesn't pick fights that he can't win. So are Alm and Ephraim perfect mirrors of each other? No, they do have their differences. But it's definitely clear to see how the character of Ephraim was initially inspired by Alm, and how Sacred Stones itself paid a huge tribute to Gaiden. And that, ladies and gentlemen, ends our very first episode of Mirror Emblem Light and Shadow.